Hello everybody, it's Mel. Thank you so much for joining me today for my June and Amazing Readathon wrap up. So yes, like many of us here on BookTube, I participated in the Amazing Readathon throughout the month of June. This is a readathon created and hosted by Bree from 4 Paws in a Book. I will link her channel in the description below so you can go and check her out. She is a fantastic person, fantastic content creator, etc., and you should definitely go and subscribe to her channel. The Amazing Readathon was a really fun readathon that went throughout the entire month of June. The idea was kind of inspired by the TV show The Amazing Race, where people travelled around the world and had to do different challenges and get points and things like that. So the way we did this one was we raced around the world via reading books, went to different countries and different prompts that led us to read different books. There are a few different teams that you could join, and I decided to join Team Fantasy because fantasy is my most read genre, and I'd say probably my favourite genre, but definitely the one I read the most often. So I did read a lot of fantasy in June. Like I said, I had a lot of fun doing this readathon. I will link my vlog in the description below as well, so you can go and check out how I went as I went along. But yeah, today is my wrap up, so I'll be talking about all the books that I read in the month of June. Before I do that, however, I do have some stats that I want to go through. Now, some of you may recall that I did not actually tell you my stats for May. So I will do that now because I did say in May that I would tell you my stats for May in June. Alright, so in May I read 8 books, which gave me a total of 2,887 pages. Of those books, I didn't have any teaching books. That particular goal has definitely fallen by the wayside. I read 2 books with LGBTQIA+ rep. I didn't read any books by BIPOC authors, which is not great. I didn't read any Australian books by Australian authors, or therefore any books by Indigenous Australian authors. That's not going very well this year either, which is not great, so I need to pick that up. I didn't read any books that were translated from a different language into English, but I did read one book that was inspired by something other than a European/British history, culture, etc. Of the 8 books that I read in May, 5 of them were physical, 1 was an ebook, and 2 were audiobooks. 1 was young adult. I didn't read any middle grade in May, and 7 of the books were adult. I didn't have any comics or graphic novels. I read 3 books off my own physical TBR, and 3 of them were rereads. Now to genre breakdown. 3 of the books I read in May were fantasy. There were no historical fantasy. 1 historical fiction, however. I read 1 sci-fi/dystopian book in May. None of them were paranormal or fabulism. None of them were contemporary or literary fiction. None of them were romance. I read 2 dark academia/horror/gothic books, and I read 1 thriller/mystery. Didn't read any non-fiction, but I did read 1 classic. I had no DNFs in May, which is very nice. No 2 stars, 3 3 stars, 2 4 stars, 3 5 stars, so I did very well in May for 5 stars. My average star rating was 4.12, and my average Corpire rating was 7.6. So ratings have been really well across the board this year. Alright, so that was May. Now for June. In June, I read a total of 14 books. This is the most amount of books that I've read in a month, I think probably ever, but definitely this year, and that is all thanks to the Amazing Readathon. I read some smaller books. I didn't read any big chunky books because the prompts were dropping every few days and I knew I wouldn't be able to get through big chunky books. So I ended up reading 14 books, and also had the biggest page count of the year in June, which was 3,816. I didn't read any teaching books. Again, I think that goal has kind of, other things have taken precedent. Of the 14 books that I read, half of them, so 7 books had LGBTQIA+ rep. 3 books were written by BIPOC authors. None of them were Australian and none of them were Indigenous Australian though. So again, I need to pick that up definitely. 2 had been translated from a different language into English, but none of them were really inspired by something that's non-Western, I wouldn't have thought. I had 8 books that I read physically, 3 books that I read on ebook, and 3 books that I read via audio. 3 books were young adult, 1 was a middle grade, and 10 were adult. I had 2 comics / graphic novels / manga. I had 6 books that I read from my own physical TBR, which is absolutely amazing. 1 was a reread. I read 7 fantasy books, so half of the books I read in June were fantasy. 1 was historical fantasy. 1 was historical fiction. 1 was sci-fi / dystopian. 1 was paranormal / fabulism. There were no contemporary or literary fiction and no romance. I did have a dark academia / horror / gothic. I didn't have any thriller mysteries. No non-fictions either and no classics. I didn't have any DNFs, which out of 14 books is pretty amazing. I didn't have any 2 stars. I gave 4 books 3 stars. I gave 8 books 4 stars. And I gave 2 books 5 stars. My average ratings for stars was 4.18 and for corporal was 7.8. So I am really, really impressed with June. I'm impressed with how much I've read. I'm impressed with how highly I rated most things. It was a really, really great month. So thank you so much, Brie. It was absolutely fantastic. I had so much fun. But let's talk about the books now, shall we? So the first book that I read in the month of June, which got me to Toronto, and for that I had to read a book that was borrowed, so from a library or a friend or something, and I borrowed The House on the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune from my friend Michelle. This was such a fun book. I really, really enjoyed this book. I have been hearing about this book and T.J. Klune in general for years. Pretty much when I started BookTube is when I started hearing about this particular book. I think it must have come out somewhere around 2019, and people were absolutely completely besotted with this book. They would not stop talking about it. So I was very intrigued to read it, but also kind of didn't want to read it because I was worried that the hype would be more than it was worth, and that I would not like it as much as other people clearly do, and yeah. So I waited for a while and I decided to pick it up this year in June because it fit the prompt, and also it is written by an author that identifies as being part of the LGBTQIA+ community, which gave me some extra points, as well as being the teen genre fantasy, which gave me some extra points. But yeah, I absolutely loved it. It definitely lived up to the hype, and I'm really, really happy that I finally read it. I gave this one an 8.29 in Corpire, which works out to be 4.5 stars, which is a pretty high rating. Not quite a 5-star. It just didn't quite make a 5-star. I didn't love it to pieces, but I did really, really, really enjoy it. So for anyone that doesn't know, I feel like most people probably do because it was so very hyped, but for anyone that doesn't know, this book follows our main character Linus, and Linus is a caseworker for this organisation called the Department in Charge of Magical Youth. So the idea is that there are children who are magical in some way, and many of them, for various reasons, have been given over to this organisation, given over to the state to be cared for by the state. So many of them are in orphanages and children's homes and different places like that. And Linus is a caseworker, and part of his role is to go to different orphanages and different children's homes and see how everything's going, making sure that they all are living up to standard, making sure that they are treating the children right, making sure that the children aren't getting up to anything too terrible, all of those sorts of things. He's just chugging along doing his job. One day he's summoned by extreme upper management, and he is given this very, very top secret job, which is to go to an incredibly high security children's home out on this island off the coast of the States, I'm assuming it is, and he needs to go and check in and find out what's going on and make sure everything is going along the way it ought to be. This is a children's home that has some of the most dangerous magical children in the world. So we have the Antichrist, we have a gnome, we have shapeshifters, we have all sorts of different children who are extremely dangerous, considered extremely dangerous, and considered extremely magical. So Linus goes out to this place, and he doesn't quite know what to expect, but he does know about the Antichrist, and he's quite nervous. And he goes out, and at first he's just doing his job. He's trying not to get too involved. He's trying not to get too involved, trying not to let himself be too drawn in, keep a professional distance. He starts to really care for these children, and he starts to really have feelings and attraction towards the overseer, I guess, caseworker. What is he technically called? Which is the master of the orphanage, which is Arthur Parnassus. And they start to develop a really close bond, and Linus starts to let some of his guard down and let some of his professional, he's still very, very professional, but some of his like what am I trying to say? Not being close to the children, his deliberate distance is starting to go away. Yeah, basically that's what's going on. Obviously other things happen. We have a few reveals, and we get to know the children really, really well. We get to know Arthur and Linus really well. Like I said, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really, really fun. I thought it was really well written. I thought TJ Klune dealt with some of the potential difficulties with being a child in that sort of situation, being a child of a ward of the state, having to be cared for by people who aren't parents. I thought that was all really, really well done. There is some controversy around the inspiration behind these books and where TJ Klune got that inspiration from. I'm not going to go into details about that controversy, but just know I was aware of it when I read it, and yeah, I don't think it's great, but I still really enjoyed the book. There's apparently a sequel coming out this year, which I'd love to get my hands on and enjoy and read, obviously, and enjoy, hopefully. But yeah, I thought this was really, really good. It's really whimsical. There's a lot of found family elements in here, and I just really enjoyed the way that these characters were explored. The children were my favourites. I have to say, I loved Lucy, our little Antichrist, and I loved all the children, but I particularly loved this one character who just wants to be a bellhop. It's his whole thing. He wants to be a bellhop, and it was so cute. I really, really enjoyed it, so I'd highly recommend this book. The next book that I read was Daughters of Sparta by Claire Hayward. This book was to get me to Buenos Aires, and for this I needed to read a book with 2 POVs. This one has 2 POVs. We follow Helen and Clytemnestra. So this is a Greek mythology retelling. Like I said, following these 2 sisters who were the princesses of Sparta. Even if you don't know much about Greek mythology and you're not really interested in Greek mythology, I would imagine that you would have heard of Helen of Troy. So Helen is one of our main characters. So we follow these 2 girls from quite young, from I think Clytemnestra is like 6 or 7 and Helen's 4 or 5 when we start the book, and we follow them as they grow up, as they marry the 2 brothers of Atreus that they marry, so Agamemnon and Menelaus. We follow Helen as she goes off to Troy with Paris, and we follow her when the war is happening, the Trojan War. We follow Clytemnestra as her husband goes off to war and incites all of Greece to go off to war with him, and the various different things that happen both to both women and around both women as a result of the war, as a result of various different things that are happening in their lives, as a result of their own actions, but also just the things that happen around them that spur them to those actions. So it is a feminist retelling. It's feminist in that we are following these 2 female characters who are part of myth, and we hear a lot about in myth, but we don't really get, in the myth, we don't really get much of their backstory or their personalities or kind of what drove them to the various things that they are famous for. We have had quite a few different retellings of the Trojan War. As you may be aware, I did a Trojan War retelling vlog project, which I did with Paige from Pages with Paige and my friend Max. I will link Paige's channel below, and that was really interesting and really fun, and we read quite a few different Trojan War retellings, and this one was great as well. I really enjoyed this one as well. I thought it was very well written. I loved the way that we were able to see the 2 different women and their upbringing and what took place in their lives and why they made the choices they made and the positions they were put into and so on. On Corpile, I gave this one an 8.86, which is slightly higher than the House in the Cerulean Sea, but still gave me a 4.5 star. The next book I read was one of the audiobooks that I listened to, and that was Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Shauna Maguire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children series. The first one that I read in May, Every Heart a Doorway, and then this one is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. I read this book in order to get me to Paris, and the prompt was to read a book that had won an award. Every single year that Shauna Maguire puts out one of these novellas in this series, it wins the Goodreads Choice Award. So it won the Goodreads Choice Award of that year, which I can't remember what it was, so I thought that it counted. And yeah, like I said, this is the second book in the Wayward Children series. The idea behind the Wayward Children series is there are a bunch of different doorways into other worlds, like the wardrobe into Narnia, that children around the world discover and walk through. And some of the children find that they are in a world that actually is perfectly suited to them, where they very much fit in and they want to be there. And then very often these children don't manage to stay and they come back through the doorway and they come back to this reality. And many of these children, their parents don't understand what's happened to them, don't understand where they've been, think that they have been through a lot of trauma and don't really know how to deal with them. And so many of them are shipped off to a school called Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. The idea that is presented to the parents is that this is where the children can go to be treated for their trauma and come back to themselves. But what it actually is a school where it's accepted that they went to another world and they are given the opportunity to spend time with other people who've been to another world and try to figure out how to live in this world where they don't feel like they belong as well as they did in the other world, but also they're all waiting for their doors to come back. So I think that the idea is that we have, we alternate between set in our reality and we're following the children after they've been somewhere, and then set in whatever place they went to. So this one is about Jack and Jill. They are sisters and they went to a place called Moors. It's kind of a creepy place. There are vampires, there are all sorts of different things going on. Jill becomes the kind of surrogate daughter to the vampire lord of this area, and Jack becomes apprentice to a kind of Frankenstein type figure. That's essentially what this book is about. For this particular book, I gave an 8.14 on Corpile, which also is 4.5 stars. But yeah, I did really enjoy this book. I really like the way that Shauna Maguire writes these novellas. I think that they are really well done. They're really fun, they're really interesting. There is a lot of amazing representation in there. There is a lot of LGBTQIA+ rep, as well as other kinds of rep, which is really amazing. And they're all, like I said, the novellas, they're quite short. They're 100 and something, somewhere between 150, 200 pages, and they pack a lot in there, but they're done very well. And like I said, I really enjoyed this one. Next up, I have two sightseeing books that I want to talk to you about. Now, what I mean by sightseeing is that when you had finished a prompt for any one of the legs to get to the various cities, you could go sightseeing and you could read books that then got you extra points for your team. Because of the way that I've structured the journal, I've put these two sightseeing books next to each other on a page. They weren't read immediately one after the other, but we're going to talk about them one after the other. So the first one of those is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica. I read this as part of a vlog series that I'm currently doing, in which I read a few books that I was inspired to read by another booktuber. In this instance, I was reading books I was inspired to read by Victoria, from what Victoria read. So if you want to hear a little bit of spoilery review on my thoughts of this book and yeah, my experience reading it, then I will link the vlog in the description below so you can go and check that out. Also, you should go and subscribe to Victoria because she's fantastic as well. All the people I'm talking about here who have channels, you should go and subscribe, and they're all in the description. So Tender is the Flesh is very confronting book. It's also a novella. It's quite short, and it is about a world, it's a dystopian world in which all the animals, I think it's all of the animals in the world, have been infected with this disease that think makes them basically like they have rabies, but like rabies on crack. Like they attack anything, they are very vicious, and if you get bitten or scratched by one, then you will end up being the same. And it also has meant that all the animals that we eat are infected, so you can't eat the meat. The way that our society has dealt with that is to start eating humans, and they grow humans, they farm humans specifically to be eaten, and we're coming at a point where this has already been established. There are farms where humans are raised, there are abattoirs where humans are killed, and we follow one of the abattoir workers who is just going about their job, but also kind of describing some of the different things that we've done in order to make it easier for us to eat these humans, eat this meat. Yeah. This book is short as well. Like I said, it's a novella, and it packs a punch. There is a lot going on in this book. It is extremely confronting. So yeah, I don't really have much else to say about it. If you want my fuller thoughts and reactions, then like I said, that vlog will be linked in the description below. The next book that I wanted to talk to you about today is Small Things Like These by Claire Keegan. This is another quite short novella that I read throughout the month. This one is a historical fiction, and we follow our main character, whose name is Bill Furlong. He is a coal and timber merchant, and we follow him as he essentially goes on his rounds at Christmas time delivering coal and timber to various different places. It's set in Ireland in the 1980s. We follow him as he, like I said, is doing these deliveries, and one of the places that he does the deliveries is to a convent, and in this convent, it's one of those places where women who fell pregnant outside of marriage were taken and then like hidden away, and then the babies were usually taken from them and adopted. And it's about him kind of starting to look at this a little bit differently and starting to wonder about the fairness of that and the equity of that. A lot goes on in this book. I found it to be, again, quite confronting in a very different way, partly because while the other one is dystopian future, this one is historical. So it was quite confronting to think about things that we as a society have in fact done, and policies and practices that we have had in place in the past, and also how things may have changed but not necessarily as much as you would hope, which was quite confronting as well. I thought it was really, really well written. Like I said, it's a small book, but it packs a lot into it. It packs a punch, and it is about someone, yeah, developing new ideas and new thoughts and questioning society, and it gives us an opportunity to question society as well, which I thought was really great. I'm not going to say too much more about this. This is another book that I'm reading, or that I've read for another of those vlogs. It's not Victoria's. I'm not going to tell you who it's for, but it should hopefully be coming out in July. But yeah, I did enjoy this one. I gave it 6.57, so actually the exact same as Tender is the Flesh, so 3.5 stars. And yeah, I would recommend. I think it's interesting and well done. The next book that I have to talk to you about, which actually came in terms of the reading order in between Tender is the Flesh and Small Things Like These, and that one is Cant Spell, Treason Without Tea by Rebecca Thorne. I, again, really, really enjoyed this book. This is a cozy fantasy. We follow our main character, whose name I've completely forgotten, who is a queen's guard to this queen in this world who is not very nice, and the main character is aware that she's not very nice, but she's been a queen's guard for a long time, but lately she's started to very much question what she's doing and not wanting to be a queen's guard anymore, wishing she could run away with her partner, who is I can't remember what they call her, but she's basically the head mage of the mages in this world. There's a bunch of different, like, I guess, queendoms and kingdoms in this world, so the mage, she's technically not necessarily, doesn't necessarily have the same power in this queen's realm as she would in other places, but she's still definitely highly respected and highly regarded. Anyway, so our main character, the guard, one night she's just had enough and she just leaves. Her and her partner go off to this little town where they decide to open a bookstore and a coffee shop. It's the same place, bookstore slash coffee shop. It's basically that. It very much reminded me of Legions and Lattes by Travis Baldree. It's that same high fantasy but low stakes. It's that same cozy vibes. We even have coffee and cakes and descriptions of food. The stakes are a little higher though, because we do also have some dragons, and the dragons are attacking this part of the world where they live because they believe that something has been stolen from them. And so these two characters end up in a bargain with the dragons, and I think it's going to continue in the next books. I didn't realise, I thought it was a standalone, but it's the first in a series. So there's a little bit more going on than that, but it is mostly about them finding their way in this new place, setting up this new business, making new friends, developing their relationship, and yeah, just setting up this business. And it's so lovely, it's so sweet. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. It's got all those cozy vibes. I'm really enjoying cozy fantasy at the moment, and this is definitely one that I, like I said, did really enjoy. I thought it was well written. I didn't think the writing was, like, I thought it was well written, but I didn't think the writing was anything particularly amazing, but it was definitely well done, and I really enjoyed the characters. I think they were probably my favourite part. I thought they were really well written. I love the way they communicated with each other. I love the way their relationship developed, and the way that, yeah, the way that they were always there for each other, and the communication between them was fantastic. I gave this one 7.86 in core pile, which is 4 stars as well. So yeah, like I said, very highly recommend. If you enjoy high fantasy, if you like Legends and Lattes, I would definitely recommend this book. The next 2 books that I'm going to talk to you about today, I'm going to talk about quite quickly because they are quite short. So I have one novella, and I have a manga, and I have a comic. So in the middle of the month we had a weekend called Face Off Weekend, and the idea was that you could gain some extra money of the Great Readathons, the Amazing Readathon's currency, to help you travel around. So much work went into this, it's amazing. So the idea was that you read as many books as you can, and they all go towards your teams getting these items, which would then potentially get you some money. I was working on a different book, which I'll come to in a minute as well, but the 3 shortish things that I read for Face Off Weekend. First of all, we have A Spindle Splintered by Alex E. Harrow. This is a novella. This is the first in a duology, I believe, and it is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. So in this book, we follow a girl in our world who has a made-up disease that it looks like she's probably going to die when she is like in her early 20s. As a child, she very much identifies with Sleeping Beauty. So as she's gotten older, she's still had this identification with Sleeping Beauty, and her best friend kind of plays into that, and they have parties and different things to do with Sleeping Beauty. And then one night she actually does prick her finger. Her friends made a party which included a spinning wheel, and her friends actually pricked her finger on the spinning wheel, and she's travelled through to another world and met another Sleeping Beauty. And it is about them trying to lift the curse and trying to figure out what is going on. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was lots of fun. Again, I thought it was quite well written. I gave this one a 7.29, which is 4 stars in core pile. So like I said, I did really enjoy it. It's a novella, so I read it quite quickly as well, and yeah, just had a lot of fun with it. Then I read this little manga, which is Cheese Sweet Home, Volume 1 by Konami Kanata. And this is just about this little cat called Chi, who one day wanders off and gets lost and is found by a little boy, and they decide to take her home. And it's just about her figuring out how to fit into this family, figuring out the various different, like, kitty litter, what that is, how you use it, various different little things about living with humans, and her kind of finding her place in this family and becoming best friends with the little boy. And it's just so cute, so sweet. I really enjoyed it. It was super quick read, but really fun. The illustrations are just really adorable, and yeah, I had a really great time with this one as well. I gave it 6.29, which works out at a 3.5 stars. And the final book that I read on that face-off weekend was Buffy the Vampire Slayer Volume 8. Series 8. This is the first volume in Series 8, The Long Way Home. So this is the TV show Buffy the Vampire Slayer. This is a graphic novel or comic book series that continues on after the TV show ended. So this is, like I said, season 8. The Slayer gang, at the end of season 7, Willow conducted a spell that turned all the potential Slayers into actual Slayers. And so we are following the various different Slayers and how that's changed the world, how that's changed the dynamics within the team, how it's changed Buffy's life, as well as like what's going on, who's the big bad, all that sort of stuff. I enjoyed this one because it's Buffy. I only gave it 6.86, which is 3.5 stars in core pile and then 3.5 stars. I don't know if it's just that I'm used to the TV show and I'm used to it being a different medium. I'm no huge comic book reader, as you would know, so I don't know if it was just that made it drop down. I did really enjoy it still because it's Buffy, but yeah, I don't think it's my favourite Buffy ever, but I'm definitely going to pick up the rest of this season 8 in comic book form and see where we go. Okay, the next book that I want to talk to you about today is the book that I read kind of during face-off weekend and before and after as well, and that was to get us to Cape Town. For this we needed to read a book that has nature on the cover, and this is one of the ones where I definitely feel like I stretched it a little bit because I picked up Inkblood Sister Scribe. It does have nature on the cover, it has these leaves, but I mean it's not a full tree or anything, but there was no specification that it had to be like a lake scene or, you know, a forest or anything, just had to have some natural element on the cover. So I decided to go for this one. This is another book that I read for that vlog that I've mentioned that I'm not going to tell you any more details about, but it should be coming soon. And I loved this book. I thought this was so incredibly well written and just so interesting, so much fun. I had a great time with this book. I gave it a 9 in core pile, which is 5 stars. And yeah, like I said, thoroughly enjoyed it. I've heard people talk about this as though it were dark academia. I definitely understand why they would say that. We feature libraries, we feature books, we feature magical books and magical libraries. So I definitely think there's dark academia elements in this story, but I also think there are witchy, magical, kind of gothic elements to the story as well. So we follow 3 main characters. We follow 2 sisters, Joanna and Esther, and then we also follow Nicholas. So Joanna and Esther have grown up with their father collecting these magical books, and he has kept this library in his house. He's always said that they have to keep these books secret. They have to keep them secret, keep them hidden. So he's always had a binding spell that he needs to renew every evening to keep the house and the library hidden. I can't remember how old she was. It may have been 18 or something like that. When Esther turned whatever age it was, 18, she wanted to leave. And her father told her if she was going to leave that she had to move on from wherever she was and go and find somewhere else to live and do something different every year in November. So she only ever stays in one place for a year and she always moves on in November. She doesn't know why he told her to do that. She just knows that that's something that she's promised her father that she would do. Joanna, the younger sister, stayed with the father and stayed doing this magic, using the books. These books are magic and they contain magic spells and incantations and different things like that. And there are a number of different things, rituals that you have to do in order to make the books work. So she stayed with the father and activating these books and keeping them secret. And then we have Nicholas, and to begin with, all that we know about Nicholas is that he also lives in a library. He doesn't know anything about the girls, they don't know anything about him. He also lives in a library with magical books. But this library is very famous among certain circles. He has no specific magic himself. He can't use the books, but all the books are written in blood, and his blood is the blood that is used. So he's a scribe, and scribes are people who have magical blood that can be used to create these books. So he's kept by his uncle and kind of kept secret in this library. They're very well off. He's very well looked after, but he basically never leaves. But then things start to happen. Things start to change for all of our characters. They start to have new thoughts about things. They start to have strange things happening. And suddenly they are on this quest to figure out what's going on, what's really happening, what the libraries are really about, how connected they are, what the various people in their lives are actually doing. Yeah, like I said, I really enjoyed it. I thought the atmosphere was fantastic. It is, like I said, kind of gothic, kind of magic. I really liked the main characters. I really liked all the characters. I thought they were really, really well written. And yeah, I just thought this was such a successful story. It was so well put together. It was so interesting. It was just fantastic. I really, really enjoyed this one. The next book that I read was a book that was going to get me to, I don't know if I can say this city's name very well, Antananarivo. I'm so sorry. It's the capital city of Madagascar. I cannot say it. I am so sorry. For this we needed to read a book that featured gods or religion. So I decided to read a very old favourite of mine, which is Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. If you've been around on my channel for any length of time, you would know this is one of my favourite books of all time. I've read this book countless times. I love it. I think it's so funny and so clever. I decided to read this actually via audio. I didn't listen to an actual audiobook. I listened to the BBC radio play, which was fantastic, which I thoroughly enjoyed. As I have read this book before, I felt like I still knew what was going on, and I was just able to enjoy the radio production. But basically, this book is about the end of the world. It's about the apocalypse. The idea is that the apocalypse will happen when the Antichrist is born on Earth, and then he will bring about the end of the world. But an angel and a demon who have been living on Earth and attempting to sway humanity one way or the other towards evil or good throughout history, they have a friendship, and they have a little bit of a pact to kind of keep it balanced. And they are involved in the coming apocalypse, and maybe the apocalypse doesn't quite go according to how you would think it was going to go. I don't really know how to talk about anything else without giving away a lot of what's going on. But like I said, it's very funny, it's really well written. I love both Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman's writing styles, and I think they worked so incredibly well together to create this story. It's very much a commentary on the world, on society, on Christianity, on religion in general. So it's a commentary and a satire, but it's also just funny at the same time. Highly recommend this book. I definitely gave it 5 stars, 9.71 in core pile, 5 stars. Always will be one of my favourite books of all time. Then we have White Smoke by Tiffany D. Jackson. This book I read in order to get me to Seoul in South Korea, and the prompt that I was reading it for was a source of light on the cover. This is another one that kind of stretched a little bit, but you can see in the little house, I don't know how well you can see it. In the little house there is, will it focus? There are lights on in the house. That's how I got around this one. I was reading this for a book club that some friends and I had started. So this is a young adult horror. We follow this young woman, Marigold, and her mother and her brother and her stepfather and stepsister move to this very strange little place. It's this kind of, I don't know how to describe it. What does it say here? It says embattled Midwestern city of Cedarville. So there's Cedarville, and then sort of part of Cedarville is this area that is very run down and hasn't been very well cared for. And the particular street that they move into, this one house that they move into, has been done up, but the rest of the houses are derelicts and no one lives in them. And her mother is offered I don't really know again what it is. Her mum's new job, it just says, but it's not really a job. She's getting a stipend, but it's like a arts grant kind of thing by this organisation. So they move into this town, and there's a little bit of bad feeling. Maybe not bad feeling, but there's not necessarily trust between the youngest stepchild and Marigold and her brother. Anyway, and then they're living in this house and some very weird things start to happen. The little girl is behaving quite strangely. She says she has a new friend that lives in the house and Marigold thinks it's a ghost. The parents don't really believe what's going on, but there's definitely some weird things happening. There's like lots of ghostly kind of things happening. It felt very much like what I would call kind of like a standard horror haunted house kind of movie, but book. I don't read a lot of horror. I don't read a lot of this kind of book, so I enjoyed this one. I don't know how other people have felt about it. People who read horror more often and haunted house books in particular, I don't know how they would feel about this one, but I enjoyed this one. I thought it was well done. I thought the creepiness factor was really well done. The atmosphere, yeah, was really, really well written. I thought the various different characters and the roles that they played in terms of the horror tropes was really well done. Marigold herself, she's a teen who has been through some quite traumatic experiences and has been forced to move across country with a stepfather who she doesn't not get along with, but doesn't exactly get along with either, and a stepsister who she doesn't really get along with as well. Isn't the nicest character. It's understandable, like for all those reasons I just said, but she's not the nicest character. But yeah, I thought it was well done and I did enjoy it. I gave it 7.71 in Core Pile, which is 4 stars. Then I read Bookshops and Bone Dust by Travis Baldry. This is the prequel to Legends and Lattes, which I read last year and really, really enjoyed. This is another, like I was saying about Cant Spell Treason Without Tea, this is another high fantasy, low stakes. So in the first book we followed Viv, who is a barbarian orc. Once she had retired from barbarianism, from adventuring, and she moved to this town and opened a coffee shop. In this book, we are following her at the beginning of her adventuring barbarian career. During one of the battles with her party, she is quite badly injured in her leg and she needs to take some time to, what's the word I'm looking for? Convalesce. And her party take her to this small town, this small seaside town, and she is left there to convalesce. At first she's not particularly happy about this because it's quite a small sleepy town and she doesn't even fit on the bed in the hotel room that she's staying in. She doesn't really have anything to do, and yeah, she's just a bit worried that they're not going to come back for her. But one day she decides to go for a walk around the town and she comes across a bookstore, which is very, like, secondhand bookstore, very run down, not very well cared for. But she has an interesting conversation with the owner of the bookstore, who gives her a book and says that this is going to be a book for you. Viv doesn't have much else to do. She's not a huge reader, but she doesn't have much else to do, so she reads the book and she loves it. And then she goes back to the bookstore and, you know, tells the proprietor what she thought and she wants another one. And they become good friends, and then they begin to do up the bookstore and try and get the bookstore running at a profit and looking nice and all of those things. There's more stuff going on than that. There is a sapphic romance between Viv and a baker who owns a store next door. There are some higher stake fantasy adventure-y type things happening as well. I really enjoyed this one. I love Travis Baldry's writing. I love the cozy vibes that he manages to bring into his stories. I love Viv as a character. I think she's just such a fun character, just so full of character. She's lovable, but she's also tough. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. I had a lot of fun, like I said. Some of the descriptions of food were fantastic. The relationship was really well done. I really enjoyed the way that they developed their relationship with each other and their attraction. And yeah, just had a really, really good time with this one. I gave it an 8 in Core Pile, which is 4.5 stars. And then the final book that I finished in the month of June was Beneath the Sugar Sky by Shauna Maguire. This is the 3rd book in the Wayward Children series, so I already talked about the Wayward Children series in general. This kind of follows directly on from the first book, but I'm not going to go into any more detail because I don't want to give any spoilers. But I did really enjoy this one as well. Again, I love the way that Shauna Maguire writes these stories. They feel very whimsical, they feel very fantastical and fun, and I just think they're a great time. I gave this one an 8 in Core Pile as well, which again is 4.5 stars. And yeah, Don't really have a lot to say about this one, but I did have a lot of fun with it, as you can tell. The final book that I'm going to mention, which I did not finish, and so I'm not going to talk about it in length. It didn't count towards any of my stats or anything like that, but I did read it and count it towards the points for our team because I read half the book before I put it down. I only put it down because the month ended. This month in July is the Australian Readathon, so I want to read Australian books by Australian authors. So I put this one down, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And that is the Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Blah, 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 blah. Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies by Heather Fawcett. Definitely going to pick this up again some point in the year, but I just want to mention that I have started this one. It's not a DNF, it's a, well, I guess it is a DNF, but it's a soft DNF. It's a put down until I find time to pick it up again. So yeah, that's how my reading went in June. That's how my Amazing Readathon experience went. I feel like I really had a lot of amazing books that I read. I read a lot. It was a great time. I'm really glad that I participated. Again, big thank you to Bree and all of the co-hosts. You all did an amazing job. That's everything that I want to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of the books that I read in the month of June, what you thought of them. Did you participate in the Amazing Readathon? Let me know how you went with that. What was your favourite book that you've read in the month of June? My favourite book was definitely Inkblood's Sister Scribe. And if you would like to leave me a comment that you don't know what, then leave me a dragon emoji because I was in Team Fantasy, and if you can see my Amazing Readathon t-shirt, I got the fantasy one, which has a dragon on it. All of my social media details are listed in the description below, so if you'd like to go and follow me on any of those other platforms, please feel free to do so. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and give this video a thumbs up. And yeah, like I said, thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next time.